So we'll begin. Welcome everyone to today's webinar session. This session is the last of our webinar series, Raw IQ. I'm Claire Williams and I'm the Vendor Alliance Manager at First Technology Digital. A few house rules. All microphones and cameras have been disabled for the session. However, please feel free to post your questions in the chat or in the Q&A window. The session is being recorded and will be shared in the next few days, as well as on our YouTube page. We hope that you find the session informative. And if you would like anyone to contact you after the session, please let me know as well. Over to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Claire, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining this week's deep dive session into Foundry IQ. Let me just share my screen quickly. There we go. Into Foundry IQ. If you weren't at the intro session a few weeks ago, I'll go over the high-level overview of what Foundry IQ is and the problem that it solves. But after that, we'll dive into the engine and we'll cover how it actually works under the hood and what the architecture actually looks like, what the security model is, and real-world scenarios that you can apply within your business. And then in the demo, we'll go over how we can set a Foundry IQ knowledge base up from scratch. So very excited for that. And then we'll have time for some questions at the end. Great, so let's dig in. So a quick high-level level set for anyone who missed the intro session a few weeks ago. Microsoft Foundry is organized around 5 different pillars. The first is the agent service, models, tools, IQ, and the control plane. Foundry IQ is the knowledge layer. It sits alongside its 2 siblings, Work IQ, which carries Microsoft 365 context for Copilot, and then Fabric IQ, which carries the semantic layer over OneLake and Power BI. And Foundry IQ is the managed knowledge layer for custom Azure-hosted AI agents. So we can see how all of these connect into each other quite nicely. Each is standalone, but can be used with each other. And Foundry IQ is built on top of Azure AI Search and is currently in public preview. There hasn't been no go live date out of preview yet, because this was just announced at Microsoft Ignite in November last year. But we expect that the Microsoft team is working quite hard to make this generally available. So let's talk about the RAG tax. Microsoft's own CVP who architected Foundry IQ put this bluntly. Traditional RAG forces every team to rebuild data connections, chunking logic, embeddings, routings, and permissions all from scratch. Each agent that you create, you now have all of this overhead up front, and that's the tax. But Foundry IQ solves this by replacing it with a reusable, topic-centric knowledge base that many agents can share through one API. You set it up once, and security, indexing, re-ranking, and iterative retrieval are handled by a managed service. And this is quite a key shift to stop funding bespoke RAG pipelines and start standardizing a shared knowledge abstraction layer, which all of your agents can make use of. So there's 3 primitives that make up the service. The first is the knowledge base. This is your top level resource. It refines 1 to 10 knowledge sources and exposes a single retrieval endpoint. That endpoint is also available as an MCP server, which means any MCP compatible client can consume it. So that's GitHub Copilot, Claude Desktop, Cursor, custom agents. Second is the knowledge sources. These are your data connections. So that's your indexed sources like Blob, OneLake, SharePoint, and your existing search indexes or remote search indexes like SharePoint or Copilot Retrieval API and web via Bing grounding. And lastly is the agentic retrieval engine. This is the multi-query pipeline that plans, selects sources, and runs parallel subqueries, re-ranks, iterates, and returns grounded results with citations, and that's what makes it more than just a search service. So let's get a little bit more specific. So index sources ingest your data with a search index. Foundry IQ auto handles chunking, vectorization, metadata extraction, and ACL synchronization. So you configure a refresh schedule that keeps itself current. The index sources today are Azure Blob Storage and OneLake and SharePoint, all indexed via an intra-app registration. And obviously this works along with whatever other Azure AI search indexes you have already. So remote sources don't store anything. Queries execute live at retrieval time, so the data is always current. Today, that could be SharePoint via Copilot Retrieval API and web via Bing grounding. And NCP servers as knowledge sources are in private preview. And this is important. Third-party SaaS systems like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Jira are not natively supported knowledge sources yet, but you can add them to your knowledge source via their existing MCP servers. So let's talk about the three-stage retrieval engine. This is the core of what makes Foundry IQ different from traditional search and retrieve systems. The first stage is query planning. The LLM, and this is where we can see the previewiness coming in. It's restricted to GPT-4o, GPT-4.1, and GPT-5 at the moment. Decompresses the incoming question into focused subqueries. It reads your source descriptions and retrieval instructions to decide which sources to look at. The second stage, the source selection and execution. Multiple subqueries run in parallel as keyword, vector, or hybrid searches, depending on how you've set it up. Azure AI Search's L2 semantic ranker rescores the results, and anything below a re-rank score of 2.5 is dropped. And then finally, the third stage, results synthesis. Results are merged via multi-layer round robin and returned either as extractive grounding data or as a synthesized answer with inline citations. So there's 3 effort levels that can control this. Minimal, which is up to 10 sources. So no planning, no synthesis. Low, which is up to 3 sources. So 3 subqueries and 5,000 tokens synthesis budget. And then medium, which is up to 5 sources, 5 subqueries, and iterative search if signal is insufficient. And that's got a 10,000 token synthesis budget. And medium is really where the magic happens. The engine reflects on its results and goes back for a second pass if needed. Each response can re-rank up to 50 chunks per subquery and return up to 200 total chunks. So you can see it's iterative. It's like when you're using say Claude Code or GitHub Copilot, when you're coding and you set the effort to maximum, you can see it going in reasoning and going in loops before it provides the answer. This is very similar. So let's talk about some numbers, some benchmarking. So these are all Microsoft benchmarks with minimal effort against medium effort across, so it's minimal to medium effort across 5 data sets. So that's SEC filings, insurance data, hotpot, and others. By Microsoft's numbers, answer quality improved 36% on average. On queries requiring 3 or more sources, medium effort more than doubled answer quality over low effort. From 46 to 95 on the hardest SEC splits. Grounded averaged above 95% with an 80% floor. Adding web as a knowledge source to recover 3 removed internal sources lifted scores by 34 points at medium effort. And yes, these are Microsoft's internal benchmarks. They're not third-party validated, but we can see a distinct improvement that can't be ignored. So this is where Foundry IQ earns its place in regulated environments. Intra ID is the spine. It's the core of everything it does. When the caller's end user token is forwarded by the query header, document level permission trimming is applied at query time. So index sources carry ACLs synchronized at index time, and remote SharePoint enforces ACLs and purview sensitivity labels live throughout the Copilot retrieval API. So Microsoft's published position is sensitivity labels are extracted during indexing, enforced at query time, and preserved end-to-end across SharePoint, OneLake, Blob, and ADLS Gen 2 without any extra steps. So I've got to outline 2 honest caveats here. Firstly, if you don't forward the user token, results will come back unfiltered. And that's a real risk if you accidentally misconfigure your agents and your knowledge bases. And second, there's no published row level security on relational sources through Foundry IQ. That falls under the Fabric IQ stack. So if your use case needs row level security on Azure SQL, you're looking at a Fabric data agent, not Foundry IQ directly. So it's quite important to make that distinction and make a note of that. So let's talk through a concrete scenario. And I alluded to this in our initial intro session a few weeks ago. So in this example, a mid-market industrial equipment distributor runs service contracts across hundreds of customer sites. A technician in the field needs to answer, am I allowed to replace this part under the customer's contract, and what does the manual say? The question they type is rather messy. Equipment not working, CTL11 light is red, maybe power supply problem. Label says P4324, cord label says UL817. Okay to replace the part. Now, I don't know about you, but all of that meant absolutely nothing to me. So this is where Foundry IQ and the engine comes into play. It breaks it down into focus subqueries, and this is where the multi-layered knowledge base comes into play. So one hits the contracts index for the customer SLA and covered parts. One hits the equipment manuals in OneLake for the CTL11 code and power supply part number, and one hits SharePoint for the replacement policy, and another searches the web for the UL 817 standard. So this is over 2 iterations. It's done 15 total subqueries across 4 data sources, and the answer names the specific parts, confirms the contract coverage, and cites the SLA, and notes the UL compliance step. So that's an expert level answer, and it gives you citations for all of it. And this is generated in seconds from the sources that would normally take a human an hour to search for manually, if they go that far. So the field service pattern isn't the only one. For insurance, a claims copilot that combines a claims management database index with underwriting manuals, regulatory bulletins, and provider guidelines. So this could be expressed as, is claim 784512 eligible for expedited settlement under our 2026 fast track policy? So this query is structured, has structured and unstructured data sources that need to be used to answer it. For another one is for professional services. An HR onboarding agent is backed by a HRIS index and policy handbooks in SharePoint, and benefit PDFs in OneLake, and local employment law via web grounding. So different employees can get different answers because of that permission trimming that I mentioned earlier. So if someone had to ask, what is my parental leave entitlement given my office and tenure? That answer cannot be generic because the answer changes depending on who's asking it. And the common thread across all 3 of these examples is that structured data combined with unstructured context, multiple sources, and permission-aware answers and citations back to the originals. So we can see it's taking all of these different data sources and combining them and using them efficiently to provide a sufficient answer. So this slide is the one that saves you from deploying the wrong tool. Foundry IQ is right for custom Azure hosted agents that span several data sources that need permission aware cited answers, will be reused across multiple use cases, and are built by a pro dev team. Regulated industries benefit the most here. DIY Azure AI search is right when you need custom chunking, custom embedding models, non-Azure OpenAI planners, or heavily controlled over-indexing. If a single-shot hybrid retrieval on one index is enough, the managed overhead isn't worth it. Copilot Studio is right when knowledge lives in the M365 graph. The user experience is either Teams or Outlook, and the builders are makers, not developers. And this is something to note. Foundry IQ and Copilot knowledge are not interoperable. So you can't reuse knowledge bases across the 2 different stacks. If a client runs both, rather plan a deliberate content strategy up front. Fabric IQ is right for structured business data that needs a semantic layer, row level security, and Power BI consumers. Fabric IQ and Foundry IQ do work quite nicely together. Foundry IQ can reference Fabric IQ as a knowledge source, and the Azure OpenAI on your data is right for a single index question and answer over a narrow doc set with no agentic behavior needed. So we can see there's a few things going on here. It can sound quite complex. I've thrown a lot at the audience, but if you have any questions, please reach out to the team and I'll be happy to answer them afterwards. So who's building this today? So there are a few adjacent customer references from Microsoft: AT&T, BMW, Commerzbank, Heineken, Atomic Work, KPMG. And to be honest here, there's no named Foundry IQ customer case studies out yet. This product's only 5 months old into public preview, and the underlying the underlying Azure AI search agentic retrieval does have production references. There are a few on the slide that Microsoft points out, but we've personally here in First Digital, in the Gen AI team, we've used this extensively over multiple production agents. That's the Azure AI search. So on the Foundry agent server side of things, which is the runtime that consumes Foundry IQ, we can see that BMW built a multi-agent telemetry analysis agent with a reported 12 times acceleration. And there's a few others on the slide from Commerzbank and Heineken as well. So this wouldn't be a First Digital session without a few honest caveats. So Foundry IQ is in public preview with no SLA from Microsoft. So Microsoft's own words that it's not recommended for production workloads yet. So breaking API changes have already happened between preview versions. MCP as a knowledge source is still in private preview, and query planners are locked to GPT 4.0, 4.1, and GPT 5. And scale caps do exist. So 10 sources at minimal effort, 3 at low effort, and 5 at medium effort. Remote SharePoint inherits a 200 requests per user per hour cap with a 1500 character queries. On pricing, there's no dedicated Foundry SKU. You pay for the Azure AI search at a basic tier or higher, and the agentic retrieval token charges are the same for GPT 4.0, 4.1, or GPT 5 for that re-ranking functionality. And Microsoft's sample calculation for about 2,000 retrievals with 3 subqueries each comes to roughly $4.32, excluding answer synthesis and a base AI search cost. So it is definitely affordable, but it's definitely not free. Sorry, give me 1 sec. So for anyone that would like to start building today, how do you get started? Well, the first step is to sign into ai.azure.com and enable the new Foundry toggle. Create a project, and then from there, the second step, under the build and then knowledge, create or connect an Azure AI search service. And this, as mentioned earlier, needs to be a basic tier or higher to enable that semantic ranking. And then step 3, create a knowledge base, add your sources, configure your retrieval reasoning effort, and then step 4, create an agent in agent service and connect your knowledge base via an MCP endpoint. And lastly, step 5, You can test it in the playground, check your citations, and refine it. So if you'd like a full tutorial, you can just search agentic retrieval pipeline tutorial on MS Learn, and it'll take you through there. But for those that would like to see it live, pray for me, and let's see how this actually looks in Foundry IQ. So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen quickly. Let's hop into Foundry. Okay, awesome. So we're here in Foundry. This is one that is running on our own tenants. You can see here that I'm in the new Foundry. If you log into ai.azure.com, you'll land on a page that looks like this. And then from here, you click on the Build tab, and then come down here to Knowledge. So this is really where things start happening. So if you've already got a Azure AI search service deployed, should show up here in the drop down. You can see here I've set this up previously in the same subscription, and we can see here that I've created an index called rag with a number, and that's the one that we're going to be using for this demo. So we can select that. You can choose between Project Manage Identity API key or Microsoft Entra. For this demo, we're going to go with an API key. Just wait for that to connect. Brilliant. So now we can see that we in Foundry IQ. So the first things we need to do is create a knowledge, add some knowledge. So we can see here, here's all the ones that I mentioned earlier: web, SharePoint, either remote or index, OneLake, and then there's a few other different tools that we can add as well. For this demo, we're going to go with Azure AI Search Index. Click Connect. From here, I'm going to call this rag. And then here is where you need to put in a little bit of a description. Now, my developer background, I'm lazy, so I don't really like doing this, but it's quite important. So why is it important to put a description in these fields when you're creating your knowledge base? Well, this is what your agent will use to decide what knowledge sources to query when. So depending on that reasoning effort level, it's basically context for your agent to know where to look. So I'm going to say use the source as your default. Top Stories archive weekly newsletters covering Microsoft licensing, cybersecurity, hardware, software, AI, and tech industry trends. And then from here, I'll select that index. Click Create. Okay, great. So now we've added a knowledge source onto our knowledge base. So now we can give it a name. So let's call this knowledge. We'll put in the same description as earlier. And then this is where we select our model that we'll use. I've got GPT-4.1 deployed already. And here's our reasoning effort. Let's go with medium for now. And the output mode is either extractive data or answer synthesis. Let's go with extractive data. And here's retrieval instructions. So this is where we describe or give context to the AI agent that will be using this, how to use these different knowledge sources. So before I do this, let's add another one. Let's go with Bing. Knowledge source, web search. Great. And then here's some advanced options where you can allow certain URLs or block certain URLs. So this is where you can control, even though it's going out to the internet, you can say, only search for, under Wikipedia, for example. Let's create that. Awesome. So now under the retrieval instructions, let's go with prioritize Okay, great. So I'm saying prioritize rag as your default knowledge source. Only use case web search when rag does not have enough information to answer the user's query. Great. So now let's save this. Awesome. So now your knowledge source has been created. We can see there it is, knowledge. It's got a description, knowledge sources, and we can see that it's active. So now how do we actually use this? So great, we've set this up. Now let's actually use it. So if we come here to agents, let's create an agent. I'm going to call this Tsai as Top Stories AR. Great. And now this is the agent playground that we mentioned earlier. So if I ask this, what is Top Stories? This is just communicating with the base model. So basically, it's, basically making this question or this answer up based off of its trained knowledge, right? So let's clear this. Let's add some instructions. So I'm giving it quite a lengthy system prompt here. Okay, let's save this. Then let's add knowledge. Connect to Foundry IQ. There we can see it's picked up our connection. Here it's going to pick up the various knowledge bases. There we go. Great. And then web search has been enabled here as well. Let's remove this for now. Let's save this. Brilliant. So now let's ask it the same question. What is top stories? Top Story is a weekly newsletter that covers key updates, trends, and insights across Microsoft. So we can see here all of a sudden the answer is way more accurate. If we go here into logs, we can see exactly what the agent's done. So here's the conversation starting up. Here's the question and the answer that the agent retrieved. Here's getting a list of MCP, and here's generated this. So we can see it's generated this basically straight from its grounding statement, because we've told it what top stories is here, right? But let's ask it, what is the latest changes with M365? While this is working, maybe I can walk you through what you can actually see here in the playground. So obviously per response, you can see which model it's using, the time it took, the number of tokens that it's generated, and you can dig into the logs here as well. At the top here, you can see the total number of tokens for this conversation, and you can also show some metrics. So if you enable all of this, we can see that we'll see all of these metrics at the bottom here as well. So great. So now it's come back with an answer. Several updates, price increases, Teams licensing changes, etc., etc. And we can see that it's given some sources here at the bottom to where it found these answers from. So let's dig into the logs and see where it actually got these answers from. So we can see here it's calling the knowledge graph, and here you can see the various queries that it's breaking the user question down into. So latest Microsoft 365 changes, recent M365 plan updates, Microsoft 365 price or feature adjustments. And we can see here, this is the output from the knowledge source. So you can see specific chunks from those documents that it's got access to. And just for context, for our context, this is actually what one of the top stories looks like. So welcome to top stories. There's some, last week's one, upcoming shows. Click here to find your account manager, hardware Dell changes, Microsoft changes, etc., etc. Right? And then at the end, Barry always likes to include some movies that are coming up. So great. So this is, you can see that it's searched for quite a lot of information to then provide quite a nice, succinct answer to the user. Now, obviously, how the agent responds, etc., can be changed. If we go up here, you can see the temperature, top P, and the output format. And also how and when the agent actually uses its tools. And you can add memory, you can add guardrails, etc., and you can add various other tools like web search, code interpreter, and there's quite a list here. So there's some configured ones, and then not a vast catalog of tools, but a fair number. Here you can see Work IQ Teams, Foundry IQ, there's Word, there's a Foundry MCP server. Foundry IQ should be here somewhere. There we go, Fabric Data Agent, SharePoint, File Search, etc. So now you can see, yes, this is using, a weekly newsletter as its data source, but now all of a sudden the examples that are provided earlier start to make a lot more sense. We can see how, if this was pointing at your SharePoint folder with, say, product information, we can see that if a person asks for um, the a part on a Yamaha motorbike, we can see that it will be able to, if the knowledge exists there, it will most likely be able to give you a very good, distinct answer on what that part is and how to replace it, etc. Great, so let's go back to the slides. Great, so let's talk about some of the costs. This is all very nice and good and well, but what is the cost? So, as I mentioned earlier, there's no dedicated Foundry IQ SKU. And you'll be charged depending on the components that you used. So in this example that I just showed, there's Azure AI Search, and that would be at a basic tier or higher. The free tier gives you 50 million agentic reasoning tokens per month. That sounds like a lot, but it can go very quickly. Um, as well as your model deployments, depending on your model, there's different costs there. Generally, it's about $5 per 1 million input and output tokens, but that changes depending on the model that you choose. And that's the Azure OpenAI charges. And the agent pre-purchase, there is an agent pre-purchase plan using consumption units. And if you decide to go down that route, it will, wrap up your aggregated spend into a 1-year metered commitment. But obviously, if you're building new agents, you don't really know what your aggregated spend is. So that's really something that you would look at 1 year or so after this has been working for a while. So what does this all boil down to? So for the most part, this is all consumption based. There's no upfront licensing like the M365 Copilot stack from Microsoft, but rather it's generally consumption based. The only caveat is the Microsoft AI search service that does have a base cost from basic above per month. But you're talking, you know, in a few thousand rand per month for a full agentic system, not in the hundreds of thousands of rand. So now this is where the sales pitch comes in. You've seen the technology, so why First Digital? Well, we hold the Build AI apps on Microsoft Azure specialization, and this is a specialization that very few Microsoft partners actually have. We were I think the third Microsoft partner in the Middle East and Africa to achieve this certification. And what it means is that we deliver projects at an extremely high certified mark to customers. We've delivered 60 plus AI projects in the last year across 40 different clients and many, many different industries. For Foundry IQ specifically, we can take you from a scoping workshop through to a working pilot in a matter of weeks, not months. And we can handle the architecture, the data connections, security configurations, and the agent build. And if you'd like, we can even stay on to help manage your knowledge base and your agents as they're used in your organization. So let's wrap up. So on a closing note, Foundry IQ isn't a finished product yet. It is in preview, but the architecture is set and the pattern is clear. And any organization building their knowledge layers now will have a compounding advantage over those who wait for this to be generally accepted. The gap isn't the AI, the gap is your business context. And Foundry IQ closes that gap. Businesses moving now will be setting the pace. And that's me. I'm open for questions. And if you'd like to explore this for your environment, whether that's Greenfield or layering Foundry IQ onto something that you already have, please reach out and my details are on screen. I hand back to Claire.
Thank you, Nathan. I have just two questions for you. Uh, say, first one is, what is the minimum configuration required to create usable Foundry IQ knowledge bases?
So the minimum would be one knowledge source, if I understand the question correctly. Obviously, without any knowledge sources, you can't really use Foundry IQ. So the simplest implementation that I've seen is to take something, data that you have in OneDrive or SharePoint that's reasonably organized, and then start building on top of that. Whether that be proposals or internal HR documents, etc. That's normally a good starting point for most customers.
Thank you. And one more question. How do you cap worst case costs per query without losing answer quality?
That's a very good question. So normally this is a difficult one to answer upfront because it all depends. It all depends on what is defined as a good answer quality, and that's where the human testing comes in. So a long story short, it's a number of testing rounds to see where the balance is between answer quality and costs. Because obviously you don't want to have a agent doing, medium effort for every single query when you might be able to create a different agent that serves that need better, but at a lower token cost. So it all comes down to tweaking and what your knowledge actually looks like to try and balance that.
Okay. And then we have a question in the chat. Would you like me to read it for you?
From Chris De Sosa.
Yes.
Um, Great question, Chris. So maybe I can dive a little bit deeper into that because it's something I didn't actually show in the demo. So let me just reshare my screen here. So
No
you'll
problem.
notice that I mentioned that I deployed a GPT-4.1 model. So let me just define what that actually means, right? If we look here at, on the left-hand side here at models, right? You'll see here there's a deployments tab, right? So this isn't all the models that are available in Foundry. There's, hundreds of different models. But to answer your question, Chris, essentially what Foundry does is when you deploy a model, Microsoft has licenses with these AI companies, both open source and closed source, to license their models. When you deploy it in Foundry, deploys a copy of that specific model within your tenant and within your environment. It's like using Microsoft SQL Server, deploying it within your Azure environment. It creates a copy essentially of the SQL code, and then you create your database, etc. So the model that you're deploying is hosted within your Microsoft environment and within the region that you specify as well. So no data gets passed to OpenAI or another cloud model provider. It all is still housed within your Azure tenant. So from that perspective, it's different from using OpenAI directly, because if you're calling their APIs, you are transferring that data to wherever they are hosting that model on their servers. Same with Claude, same with Grok. Whereas with Foundry, whatever model you deploy lives within your Microsoft Azure ecosystem. I hope that answers your question. Great.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you for your time today. If you have any further questions, please reach out to your First Technology account manager or your First Digital BDM. As mentioned in the beginning of the session, it was recorded, so you will receive an email in the next couple of days with a link that you can share, or you can have a look at our YouTube page as well for any of the previous sessions. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.